Republicans finally launching investigations into former President Biden's inner circle for allegedly hiding his health decline from the American people. And now, House Oversight Chair James Comer told Jesse Waters last night that subpoenas could be flying as soon as a week from now, especially if these aides who have been sent letters deny to answer questions under oath.
We're going to request that 4 staffers that we've identified as the main gatekeepers for the Biden White House, that they come and answer our questions. We're also requesting that Dr. O'Connor come. That's the first step towards a subpoena.
Well, tell me first who these 4 people voluntarily. Who are the 4?
These are the unelected bureaucrats that we believe had an overwhelming influence over Joe Biden and could have possibly been serving as de facto presidents of the United States.
Would you expect to subpoena Hunter and Dr. Jill?
Yeah, I think we're going to start with these and see where the road goes. You know, what I said back during the end of the Biden administration, that our sources were telling us that Hunter Biden was spending more time in the Oval Office than Joe Biden.
Wow.
I said on some shows that Hunter Biden was essentially the de facto chief of staff. This is a huge problem, and I think that every American deserves answers, and we're going to bring every single person that was involved in this cover-up in front of Congress and ask them all the questions that the American people deserve to have answers for.
When do you expect these subpoenas to go out?
Well, the letters have already gone out to the staffers as well as Dr. O'Connor. So if we don't hear anything from them in a week, then I would expect to start seeing subpoenas.
Hello, everyone. This is a special edition of Outnumbered. I'm Kayleigh McEnany here with my co-host Harris Faulkner, along with Tomi Lahren, Fox News contributor and host of Tomi Lahren is Fearless on Outkick and FoxNews.com. And joining us on the couch for the very first time on this Friday, Alicia Acuna, Fox News senior correspondent, excited to have her, and David Asman, Fox Business anchor. You know, Tomi, we didn't hear the names from James Comer, but now we know the names of people who have received letters, and so we will name them here. Anthony Bernal, who was the top watchdog, essentially, for Jill Biden. You have Annie Tomasini, she was the head of Oval Office operations, her deputy, Ashley Williams, Kevin O'Connor, the doctor, and then Neera Tanden, who was the head of Domestic Policy Council. Those are the names. So these are people who, some of whom are alleged to have cocooned the president. Nice letters and kind requests to come to Congress might work, but a prediction I have is that subpoenas will be necessary and probably in short order.
Kayleigh, Republicans are just too nice. They send a letter and they wait for a response. Democrats don't operate like that. Democrats are cutthroat. If they want something, they go after it. Republicans would be smart to maybe follow that example, especially when it comes to something as important as this. I understand the investigation fatigue. I think a lot of Americans, they want to see accountability, but sometimes when you have the investigations on top of investigations, people go, all right, just move on already, fix the economy. However, this is so important because this can never be allowed to happen again. We were lied to. This was a big lie. There are many, and they're just piling up and piling up and piling up. And we're probably never going to get answers to. COVID is one of them, but also the Biden decline. There has to be accountability here. And those that cocooned the president, and that's a great use of the term, by the way, because I feel like we were watching the movie Cocoon for the last 5 years. For those who are unfamiliar with that movie, take a look at it. You'll know what I'm talking about. But there has to be accountability. Republicans, if you want to go down this road, go the distance. Don't walk and just prance down the road. You got to run down the road. You got to run down the road. That's well said. And I love that you mentioned investigation fatigue, because that's certainly true. There are a lot of Americans who say, you know, just focus on inflation. I get that. But the more I look into this and the more I see the Biden connection to policy and what happened to you, that's why it matters. Harris, this anecdote that I found in this Alex Thompson book, there was an immigration meeting that took place, and I believe it was in 2022. So the administration had at one point considered cracking down on the border, apparently. They decided not to do that. No one knew what happened to the plan, who changed the plan. Well, one cabinet secretary present at that meeting where Biden apparently had, quote, a glitch, believed that Biden's limitations had given his aides more power to steer the administration. If you had, this is a direct quote from a former cabinet member, if you had a 20 years younger Joe Biden, I think he would have been more on top of the issue of immigration and what was going on, the cabinet secretary said. Well, 11 million people got into the country. Young women lost their lives. And we could have used a 20-something younger Joe Biden or someone who could do the job.
When are we going to get to the word complicity here? Because if you are a cabinet secretary, you actually had to get confirmed. It's not like some official that just came out of the woodworks who was like the secretary of the office taking notes and answering phones. You're a cabinet secretary, and you're making the determination that perhaps that person shouldn't be in that position at that moment. Now, look, did I anticipate ever that liberals would 25th Amendment this guy? No, because they didn't want that power wrested from their hands. But I do think that if it was infecting policy, there are probably some foreign leaders, and who's traveling the world making friends more than anybody? President Trump. I bet there's some foreign leaders who have a few things to say about the condition of Joe Biden and what perhaps may have been put into play or stymied because he was deficient. And probably we could learn about a few people behind the scenes. I don't know if auto pen even applies. They were doing some stuff. Obviously, the country didn't stop. It just didn't go the way that Americans wanted, which we found out on November 5th. So I have a whole lot of curiosity about this word complicity and why we aren't using that more. When we talk about those around him, it was more than just 5 people. Now we know of a cabinet secretary. Who else saw that he was deficient in ways to run the country? Not the next 4 years, but presently during the last 4.
Yep. Well, here's another name, Senator Mark Warner. He was chair of still is House Select Committee on Intelligence, now obviously no longer in leadership because Republicans took over. But here's what he said after the release of 11 from Guantanamo. He talked to President Biden. He expressed his concerns about releasing these individuals from Guantanamo, and he walked away with a brand new worry. And it wasn't about the release of these individuals. Here was his new worry. Biden seemed oblivious to concerns that Warner thought were rather obvious. The president was clearly not up to speed on this. Warner wondered how much of this was related to the president's aging issues, which he had felt had become visible to all who watched. So now we've moved from immigration. We've brought you over to releasing people from Guantanamo and a senator who was named in this book who had concerns.
And on this Memorial Day weekend, as we begin the Memorial Day weekend and honor those who sacrificed so much for us, just imagine being one of those generals who was advising the president on the Afghan withdrawal and realizing and recognizing, in fact, they've all said it, even ones that were very close to Biden and that didn't like Trump, like Milley, like General Milley, has said publicly that the advice they gave him directly contradicted what he ended up doing that may have put our troops at risk. And of course, 13 of our brave troops died during that withdrawal, partly because of terrible things that were going on in terms of security, in terms of leaving the Bagram Air Base before the civilians had gotten out, which is exactly the opposite of what the advice that all of those generals were giving him. And then watching, as you say, Mr. President, we think you should do this. We don't think you should do what you're planning to do. And then they see Hunter Biden walking out of the Oval Office. You know, what kind of, I mean, honestly, I wonder why and how these people were able to stay in that position, knowing what was happening. They knew that he was not only incapable, but was literally putting our troops at risk, putting their lives at risk, 13 of whom, by the way, did pass away as a result of that horrible explosion, not to mention the hundreds of Afghans. President Trump has said, you know, yes, it was a horrible thing that our troops died, but don't forget there were also hundreds of Afghans that died in that, too. So, no, this was a horrible, horrible situation. It should not have happened.
Alicia, and it could have happened with just a few people knowing, you know, having worked in the West Wing and then also at the RNC and also on a presidential campaign. I can tell you this much. There's a very good chance people at the DNC didn't know what was going on. I didn't really know much of what was going on in the West Wing when I was at the RNC. Same at the campaign. You could cocoon the president with about 10 to 15 people knowing. Right. And we need to figure out who those people are and get answers from them, one of whom is Jill Biden, who apparently after the 2-hour press conference in January of 2022, when Biden walked out, she ran up to Jen Psaki in Cape Bedingfield and said, "Why didn't you guys stop that? Where were you?" And it just occurred to me then, you know, I just can't imagine a scenario where the First Lady, Melania Trump, would have run up to me after a Trump press conference and said, "Why didn't you stop him?" That is highly unusual behavior from a First Lady.
No, it's incredibly striking. And all of the information that we've received out of this book, everything that we've learned, I just keep coming back to Jill and Hunter Biden because they were the closest to the president at the time. They knew it was at risk. They knew the situation that we were dealing with. And also, can I add, Anthony Bernal, the Jill Biden senior advisor, because he wielded her name, Jill Biden, like a weapon. If he wanted to get something done that other staffers found questionable because they were watching a diminishing president at work, he would shut it down with her name. And can I just add, the day after the debate, the disastrous debate, we know that the family got together and they were trying to decide what to do. And they were doubling down. And it was described in the book that Hunter Biden was almost, quote, manic about his father staying in because it was the family against the world. No mention about the United States and America and what was best for the people who live here.
I mean, how is it that we're finding all this out now from a bunch of books where people's only intent is to make some money? Are we in doubt about that? Because if they wanted us to know the truth, they could have shared it contemporaneously, but now they're cashing in.
Yep, now they're cashing in, and we learned the truth. Thanks, press.
Hey, everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.